Good evening, everybody. Hell's Unicorn here once again, giving my quick analysis of the debate that happened tonight on CNN between the seven Republican candidates that were featured. And I'm going to kick this off with just a little quick aside regarding CNN's rather stupid decision to exclude former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson from the debate. I'm a little bit tired this evening from a long day's work, so I don't really have the energy to really get passionate about this. But I would just like to say that I am extremely disappointed in CNN for this. As a matter of fact, I'm bordering on furious at them for this. Michelle Bachmann didn't declare her candidacy until actually being at the debate, and she is not filing, I don't think, until tomorrow. Gary Johnson has already filed, and unlike Michelle Bachmann, he actually has some experience as an executive, and he has a good bit more individual experience in politics than she does in terms of what that entails. Let me just get right into this right now. Gary Johnson has run an entire state. He has run a state that is in a very unique situation, and I would argue he is in a very good position to add something to the debate in terms of ideology. Yes, I understand on a lot of issues he is all but equal in terms of his assessment of situations as that of Ron Paul. I believe that he is very much the heir to the Ron Paul ideology, but with some very significant exceptions, probably the biggest one being the abortion issue. As many of you already know, I am pretty strongly pro-life. I actually do believe that life and identity are synonymous with each other, and therefore I think that at conception, since identity is established through the merging of the necessary genetic material to spurt life, that thus we are dealing with life, even if we are dealing with a small collection of cells. We were all that little collection of cells at one point. And I might be committing the line drawing fallacy by saying this, but I think that in any given situation when drawing a line on this issue, you basically are. Having said all that, when it comes to just about every other issue, Gary Johnson is very good, and I think that he brings something worthwhile to the discussion. I don't think that Michelle Bachmann does. I think that Michelle Bachmann is a carbon copy of Mitt Romney, but with a skirt on. She plays up the Tea Party thing and the grassroots angle nicely, but ideologically there's very little in common between the two. And so, in retrospect, I would have included Gary Johnson had it been my decision, and I would have excluded Michelle Bachmann at least until she had declared. And if she had made it her intention to declare on the show, I would have had 8 people instead of 7. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, I'll just give you my quick assessment of each individual candidate. Rick Santorum, as far as I'm concerned, is a political non sequitur. He's indistinguishable from Romney on most of the issues that count. The only way that he really separates himself from Romney is that he's got a slightly younger face, and so he might rake in some votes with some of the more ignorant independent voters who go for looks rather than substance. And he's more of a hardliner on social issues. Now, their opinions on social issues with things like abortion and gay marriage don't mean a whole lot at the federal level because nothing ever gets done on those issues anyway, even if there was something to be done on these issues that would be worthwhile. And in the case of the gay rights thing, they're both pretty well dead wrong on that issue. So basically, Rick Santorum spent the whole evening bashing Obama. I can respect that. I bash Obama often. I think he's one of the worst presidents this country has had in recent history. Definitely one of the worst post-World War II presidents we've had. But that alone doesn't sell me. So even though Santorum's from my state, don't really see him as that impressive. Tim Pawlenty. I just can't get psyched about the guy. Again, too much in common with Romney. I feel like I'm looking at 5 or 6 carbon copies of the same guy, one of them not a guy. I mean, Pawlenty is, in addition to being all but synonymous with Romney, he's also very flat. I don't get a sense of passion from his speaking. He just kind of mouths the words, and he's just kind of there, but not really making much of an impression. Michele Bachmann. Michele Bachmann, I am very sorry to say, probably committed one of the biggest gaffes of the entire debate. She was asked a question as to whether she would interfere with states' rights. It was a question about whether or not New Hampshire has the right to recognize gay marriages. According to the Constitution, 10th Amendment, they're allowed to do that if they want to. That right is reserved to them because it's not covered in any of the other amendments. So, on that point, seemed like she was okay. But then, all of a sudden, as we go down the list of different candidates, they did one of these things where they asked all the candidates the same question and asked for a short 5-second answer. Everybody was saying constitutional amendment banning gay marriage, constitutional amendment banning gay marriage at the federal level, which there's no constitutional authority to do. And Michele Bachmann joins in with the rest of the crowd and just says, I support a constitutional amendment defining marriage between a man and a woman, but I'm not going to interfere with the state's right to do that. What the heck do you think you're doing by making a declaration and adding it to the Constitution at the federal level? When you add an amendment to the United States Constitution, you are taking a prerogative away from the states. You can't have that both ways. The only person who was right on this question was Ron Paul. You cannot encroach upon the states, even if you don't like what they're doing. Personally, I don't care what New Hampshire does on this issue, and even if I lived in the state, it would not be something high on my priority list. So anyway, Michele Bachmann basically came across as ignorant, and nobody called her on it. And particularly the analysis afterwards, CNN anchors didn't even mention it, which I'm very disappointed in. Apparently, we've got a room full of hundreds of people, spectators, analysts, and everybody else, and only one person in the room actually understands constitutional law, and that's Ron Paul. Throughout the course of the debate, I heard several candidates paying lip service to it, particularly Romney and also Newt Gingrich, but I didn't get a lot of specifics when it came to certain issues such as state nullification and whatever. But Gingrich and Romney, I think for the most part, were sort of sapping ideas out of Ron Paul. In fact, I noticed that Romney was looking at Paul very intently when Paul was giving his answers on certain questions, and it looked like he was even taking some mental notes in the process. I do not believe for a second that Romney would adequately follow through on any of the viewpoints that he's trying to siphon away from Paul's rhetoric. But I think he's going to be paying lip service to it. Now, obviously, I recognize it for the lies that it is, but a lot of people might be fooled by it, and I think that's very disappointing. And I think in future debates, Ron Paul should probably call more people on this stuff. Now, Paul did one very good thing during the debate with regards to the war issues, and this is something that needs to be brought up. The President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief. Two things naturally follow from that. Number one, it is very much desirable that if you're running for the office of presidency, that you actually have some experience in the military. And the only person on that stage who has any military experience is Ron Paul. Served for 5 years. He served as a medic for the Air Force, so he was not necessarily shooting at people, but he was seeing the end result of war, and a needless war at that, in the case of, the Korea to Vietnam era. He saw the bodies missing parts. He saw people who were on life support and all that stuff. He had to, save lives that were probably only going to be half of a life given all of the debilitations that would have resulted from the injuries. He understands war, and that's why he's not so cavalier about it. And on top of that, when all of these other empty suits and one empty dress talked about consulting with generals about whether or not we should go into a conflict, Paul gave the answer that nobody has had the guts to give, and it is the correct answer. The president does not obey the generals. The generals obey the president. Otherwise, the president is not the commander-in-chief. He is simply a rubber stamp for the military-industrial complex and the Pentagon. I'm going to make something very clear to all of you, because in past videos I've been critical of the concept of the office of the presidency. But I do understand at one level where the presidency functions very well. It functions primarily as an additional check on the power of the military. The Congress is the principal check because they have the power to declare war. But the executive branch, particularly the president, has the ability, provided the right person is in office, to provide an additional check. And he can order the commanders on the ground to withdraw. And he can tell the generals to stand down when they're raising holy hell about how we need to go to war here or there. Not their decision to make. We don't live in a military state here. We're not in a military dictatorship. The generals do not determine when we go to war. They are in charge of prosecuting the war, but not determining whether or not we go in. And ultimately, neither should the president. But the president is definitely in a position to declare victory on the guidance of the Congress and to get the troops out. That's where his authority is. And the fact that these weak-kneed, linguini-spined imbeciles don't have the intestinal fortitude to go up and say, I'm the president, this is my decision, is very telling. And then we go on to Mr. Soundbites, Herman Cain. A lot of people like this guy, including some of my libertarian-leaning friends. I don't. When I listen to this guy speak, I literally feel like I'm being pitched a line by the world's most pithy and concise fertilizer salesman. I have a hard time believing a single word that the guy says. I have a real hard time trusting him, given his past connections with the banking establishment. And I really don't like the fact that he got duped into thinking that TARP was a good idea. Even Michelle Bachmann, who I think is, in many respects, a half-wit, wasn't fooled by that. And indeed, a majority of congressional Republicans weren't fooled by that. Ham-fisted numbskulls like John McCain and Lindsey Graham might have been fooled by it in the Senate. But the first vote in the House, TARP was voted down. We actually had some men in Congress back then, even though it was the minority. The Republicans were in the minority at that point. Herman Cain is basically the ultimate version of a political weather vane. Every time he says he would defer to his advisors, what he is doing is he is saying that he's not in a position to actually know what the right thing is to do without somebody else's advice. And I'm sorry, there are times when you hold the power of life and death in your hands that you should be pretty well informed on the situation. As far as I'm concerned, Herman Cain is done. And his supporters don't know it yet, and they probably never will. And so I don't see much point in engaging with discussion with them anymore at this point. I respect Mr. Kane's accomplishments as a CEO. I have been to Godfather's Pizza a couple times. We don't really have one near my area, but there's one in New Jersey that I've been to a couple times. It's very good pizza. But unfortunately, the pizza man is not in a position to handle United States foreign policy, whether he's just the delivery guy or if he's running the whole dang place. So I'm going to wrap this commentary up by just saying a few things regarding the after-debate coverage. I have mixed feelings about the way CNN handled this. I'm furious with them for excluding Gary Johnson because, quite frankly, if we're going to have 6 neocons on the stage with Ron Paul, we can at least have one more libertarian along for the ride. But at the same time, they were pretty fair and even-handed in the way that they presented questions. They gave everybody a chance to get their views across. And, more importantly than anything else, they actually gave Ron Paul the opportunity to be interviewed after the debate. I think this, in part, was a snub on Fox News on Ron Paul's part, and I couldn't have enjoyed it more. I think that Sean Hannity deserves to get snubbed given the horrible way that he treats his interviewees and how blatantly biased he tends to be in his questioning. Everybody has personal biases when it comes to political viewpoints. Everybody has viewpoints. But not everybody allows those viewpoints to interfere with the way that they handle questioning with people with alternative views. And Anderson Cooper did a reasonable job and an even-handed job in the interview. I salute him for it. And I salute most of the people in CNN for at least mentioning Ron Paul in the after-debate coverage. Can't really say the same for Fox News. They're not talking about Ron Paul much at all. And I think the main reason for that is because Fox News is most of the political punditry, with maybe the exception of the libertarian contingent and maybe even Neil Cavuto, is not really interested in hearing the libertarian view on things. And I think times need to change, or else Fox News is going to be out. I mean, I'll watch Freedom Watch and maybe some of John Stossel's material, and I'll occasionally tune into your world, but if I want, punditry, I'm just going to go to Russia Today or some of the other alternative media. I mean, I'm not getting all the information I need, and I'm not getting even-hand coverage. As far as I'm concerned, fair and balanced, insofar as it deals specifically with the punditry on Fox News, is at best a misnomer. In terms of their general reporting, they do about the same job as any other network. I mean, they're being fed AP lines and Reuters lines, and they're just basically rehashing them. But at the end of the day, what counts is what gets reported and what doesn't, and even in what stories people choose to report, you will find more coverage of Romney and the other so-called establishment people on Fox News. And indeed, they get more commentary on the other networks, but Paul at least gets a mention. And I think part of the reason for that is because Paul has become impossible to ignore now. There's too many people that know about him, and there's too many people that support him. In some of the polls, he's in double digits, which puts him de facto in second or third place, depending on whether or not certain individuals are running. I really wish that the news networks would shut up about Sarah Palin, John Huntsman, and even though I generally like him, Chris Christie. It's become abundantly clear that these people are not running this time around. And the same goes for Texas Governor, what's his name again? I keep forgetting his name. Rick Perry. Not really crazy about the guy. As far as I'm concerned, he's George W. Bush version 2.0. Not interested. but they just keep on talking about them, and so I have to shut the news off. And pretty much my time spent watching the news from now on is probably just going to be watching the debates. I was toying around with the idea of quote-unquote boycotting the CNN debate because they didn't include Gary Johnson, but the alternative was to wait until later and just watch it on YouTube, but it's too late at night, so I figured, all right, I'll just watch the regular airing of it, which is at a reasonable time, and then that'll be it. That concludes this evening's commentary on the second Republican primary debate that was held by CNN. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.